He didn't say happy birthday, he didn't say I miss you, just accusations don't end well, Mom. That was the first thing I heard from Jordan after 3 years. His voice came through the phone on a gray, drizzly May morning in Eugene, Oregon, cold, distant, like I was a stranger to him now. The box arrived before the call. Brown paper, blue ribbon, no return address. But I recognized the handwriting right away. It was Jordan's, neat and tilted, just like how he used to label his science fair projects back when he was 12. Inside were cookies, not from a store. These were made by hand, each one decorated with flowers and stars, with tiny words written in icing. Love, hope, forgive. They were beautiful. They looked like peace, but I couldn't eat a single one. I stood in the kitchen just staring. My hand hovered above the lid but never lifted it. I peeled one off the wax paper using a napkin, careful not to touch it. I sealed it inside a plastic container and pushed it all the way to the back of the fridge, behind the condiments and the jar of jam I hadn't touched in weeks. Some part of me already knew I might need proof. I rewrapped the rest of the cookies, tied the ribbon again like nothing had happened. Then I called Nancy, my neighbor from across the street. I asked if she wanted to come over for tea. I even managed to sound cheerful, like I'd rehearsed it. 10 minutes later, she showed up, brushing rain off her jacket. She said the rain smelled like rosemary. I poured us some Earl Grey. The house smelled of cinnamon and lemon cleaner. Out back, the lavender had just started to bloom. When Nancy saw the cookies, her face lit up. She said, "Well, look at that. Jordan finally remembered his mom, huh?" I nodded and forced a smile. She picked a daisy-shaped one, took a bite, then another, said they were delicious, and told me I should try one too. I said I would, but I knew I wouldn't. She asked if she could take the rest of the cookies home. I let her. Later that night, I was wiping down the counter when the phone rang. The phone wasn't saved in my contacts, but I answered anyway. It was Jordan. His voice was low, almost casual. He asked, "Did you eat the cookies?" I froze, the cloth in my hand still dripping. I told him, "No, not yet." There was a pause. Then he said it again. "You know, accusations don't end well." And he hung up. I didn't sleep that night. The next morning, I was still at the kitchen table, tea gone cold beside me, when my phone buzzed. It was a text from Nancy's daughter. She said Nancy was in the ER, something she ate. I turned toward the fridge. The plastic container was still there, still sealed, still untouched. The house was quiet. But in that stillness, something inside me shifted. I used to think staying silent was safer, that if I waited long enough, Jordan would come back to me. But this didn't feel like distance anymore. It felt like a test. And for the first time, I wasn't sure if I'd passed or just barely made it through. If you've ever second-guessed a gift or sat in the quiet, wondering what someone's silence really meant, I hope this story made you feel a little less alone. Have you ever trusted your gut when something felt off? Or maybe you didn't, and still remember how that turned out? Tell me in the comments. I'm reading every one. And if you're still here with me, stay close, because what happened next, it started with a visit to the clinic, and a truth I couldn't ignore anymore. I didn't eat anything the next morning. The toast on my plate just sat there, cold and curling up at the edges like paper left too close to a candle. I kept my hand above the mug of tea I'd made, but never lifted it. I just sat still, staring at the Tupperware container in the fridge. What kind of mother starts suspecting her own son? Maybe the kind who's been treated like a ghost for years, the kind who smiles through short, distant conversations, who keeps sending texts that go unanswered, who gets pushed to the corner at holiday dinners like she's barely there. I kept telling myself it was probably just food poisoning. Maybe Nancy's stomach was sensitive. Maybe she had wine with something greasy. But something deep inside me wouldn't settle. The quiet in the house felt different, heavier, thicker. The cookies were still there. I hadn't thrown them out. And honestly, I couldn't bring myself to. By late morning, I was at the urgent care on 3rd and Oak, standing just outside room 4. I leaned against the beige wall while Melissa, Nancy's daughter, stood beside me with her arms crossed tightly. Her ponytail was messy at the edges, and she looked like she hadn't slept a minute. She whispered, "The doctor said there's something off in her blood work. They're running more tests." I asked, trying to sound normal, "Off how?" She glanced at me and said, "They didn't say exactly, just that it doesn't look like a regular stomach bug." I nodded. I didn't say anything else. I didn't bring up the cookies. I didn't suggest anything. That part of me, the one that always feels the need to explain, stayed quiet. When I got back home, the fridge hummed softly as I opened the door. The container was right where I'd left it. I used a napkin to lift it out, barely touching the cold plastic. The cookies still looked perfect, golden around the edges, chocolate chips nestled in like tiny buttons. I placed the container on the counter and opened my laptop. I typed in things like common bakery contaminations, homemade cookie food poisoning, and then arsenic and sugar, cyanide symptoms. The search results made my stomach twist. I started remembering Jordan's 5th grade science project, the one about toxins. He had this obsession with household dangers, mold, bacteria, anything invisible and harmful. He had memorized every fact in that little book. Back then, I thought it was just a phase, just a curious boy being curious. But now, it felt like something different. I slid the cookies into a Ziploc bag. Then I walked to the hallway closet, opened the small fireproof box where I keep important documents, and tucked the bag inside. It wasn't airtight, but it felt safer. At least it was out of sight, contained. That night, I didn't turn on the porch light. I just sat near the front window with the curtain barely open, watching the street. It felt like all those late nights when Jordan used to miss curfew in high school. Every shadow stretched longer than it should. Every sound, a dog's collar, a branch, a passing car, felt too sharp against the silence. Later, I found his note again on the dining table, the same card he'd taped to the cookie tin. It read, "Happy birthday, Mom. Hope you enjoy these." I turned it over. On the back, there were faint marks, like something had been written, then rubbed away. I grabbed a pencil from the junk drawer and gently shaded over the surface. And the words came back, faint, uneven, like a ghost rising from the paper. "You should have stayed quiet." That's when my hands started to shake. I reached for the landline. Yes, I still have one. I dialed a number I hadn't touched in over 10 years. "Hello?" a surprised voice answered. "Hi, it's Evelyn Grant from the library. I think I need your help." Back when I worked at the library, I used to believe that every story had its place, everything neatly shelved, cataloged, in order. But sitting in that small, sterile office at the Eugene Police Department, I realized something that chilled me to the bone. Some stories don't belong in books. They belong in evidence bags. I wasn't after revenge. I wasn't trying to make a scene or end up in the news. I just wanted to stay alive long enough to bake my own birthday cake next year. And I couldn't shake the feeling that staying silent might take even that away from me. Detective Chen's office had no windows, just buzzing fluorescent lights and the stale smell of old coffee. I sat stiffly in a hard chair across from him, gripping my purse like it might slip away. I had taken off my wedding ring before coming in, not to make a statement to anyone else, just to myself, a quiet line I needed to draw. He looked up from his notes once I'd finished. "So, you haven't eaten the cookies, and your neighbor had one and got sick." I nodded. "She's still under observation." And the note? I slid it across the desk. It was taped to the box. There's something on the back, a message that was erased. I tried to bring it back with a pencil, and I stopped there, unsure of how I sounded, like someone falling apart, or maybe like someone who was finally waking up. He read the front of the card, then flipped it over. His face didn't change much, but he nodded, like he understood more than I'd even said. Then he grabbed a paper form and started writing. He picked up the Ziploc bag with the cookies and turned to the young evidence tech in the corner. She wore gloves and glasses and hadn't spoken once. "Log this," he told her. "Hazard category C. Keep it sealed." She took the bag and left quietly. Chen turned back to me. "You're not crazy," he said. I blinked. "No?" "You're careful. That's different." And something in me shifted. Maybe it was the relief, or maybe just hearing someone say it out loud. But I finally breathed in deeper than I had in days. We talked for another 10 minutes. He asked if I'd felt physically threatened, if I had any other family nearby, if I had somewhere safe to stay. I told him I'd lived in the same house for 43 years, and I wasn't planning on leaving it now. When I stepped outside the station, the air felt sharper, like the rain was on its way. I walked slowly to my car, the wind tugging gently at my coat. For the first time in a long while, I felt awake. Not safe, just awake. That night, right after I'd brushed my teeth and pulled back the covers, my phone buzzed on the nightstand. The number wasn't saved. "You talk to anyone, Mom, and we're done forever." No punctuation, no name, but I didn't need one. I stared at the screen for a long time. My hands were steady, strangely calm. I thought about every holiday I'd hosted, every time I'd bitten my tongue, every moment I'd made myself small to keep the peace. Then I typed back, "We already are." I set the phone down without turning off the lamp. For once, I wanted the light to stay on. If you've ever had to draw a line with someone you love, I hope you know you're not alone. This wasn't easy for me to share, but I wonder, have you ever chosen truth over peace? Leave me a comment. I'd really like to hear if something like this has ever happened to you. And if this story reminds you of someone you care about, maybe share it with them too. There's more to come, and trust me, what I discovered next changed everything. So stay with me. I'll tell you what happened. Detective Chen took the cookie, but not the fear. That came home with me, heavy and quiet, like it knew something I didn't. The Tupperware was gone now, sealed up somewhere in an evidence bag, but the silence it left behind in my fridge felt louder than anything. That afternoon, I sat in the living room. Bach was playing softly on the old stereo. A lavender candle flickered on the mantel. It was the same routine I used to follow after long days at the library. Everything in its place, calm, familiar. But this time, nothing felt calm at all. I sipped my tea slowly and watched the rain tap against the window. Then my phone buzzed. Voicemail. "Hi, Evelyn. It's Laya. I know it's been a while. Can we talk? Just the two of us? Please." Her voice sounded fragile, like someone who'd been holding too much for too long. I didn't respond right away. Instead, I went to the bedroom and pulled out the old shoebox where I keep letters and cards from Jordan. Mother's Day, Christmas, birthdays. The handwriting was always the same, but over time, the tone had shifted. It felt colder, less like love, more like duty. I thought about the last time he visited, 2 years ago. We had lunch, or at least I did. He barely touched his food and told me not to bother with dessert, said sugar was poison. That word stuck with me now. I walked over to the recycling bin and pulled out what was left of the cookie box. It had been opened too neatly. No barcode, no brand name, no receipt. Just glossy cardboard with faint folds, like someone had folded it shut carefully, deliberately. As I ran my fingers along the edge, something came rushing back. A memory I hadn't thought about in years. Jordan asking me over coffee one day if I'd updated my living will. I remember laughing it off, but I wasn't laughing now. The music behind me swelled, a piano piece Jordan used to play over and over when he was 10. I hadn't heard it in years. I had no idea how it even ended up in the CD stack. Then my phone rang again. It wasn't Laya this time. It was him. "Mom?" His voice was steady, low. "Have you told anyone else?" I froze. "I don't know what you're talking about." There was a pause. "You should stop making this so hard." I didn't flinch. I pressed the phone tighter to my ear and stared into the dark window. All I could see was my own reflection. "Then maybe you should stop pretending you love me." He hung up, and I just sat there, breathing while the music kept playing. Part of me wanted to cry, but instead I reached for the armrest and held it tight, my knuckles turning white. No more pretending. No more waiting for someone else to decide what's safe. Laya looked thinner than I remembered. She had on a soft gray sweater and jeans, her hair pulled into a loose bun, and she sat like someone who'd been holding her breath for far too long. I saw her through the glass before I even walked in. She was already at the window table, hands folded neatly, eyes locked on the mug of chamomile tea in front of her. Steam curled up, but she didn't seem to notice. Sometimes the truth doesn't come out in court. It slips out in parking lots and coffee shops, one careful sentence at a time. I sat down across from her. Neither of us spoke for a while. Then the waitress came over. She was young, bright-eyed, holding a notepad that looked too clean to have seen much use. I said, "Just coffee. Cream, no sugar." She nodded and left us alone again. Laya finally looked up. "Thank you for meeting me." "I wasn't sure you'd actually call," I said. She gave a small, dry laugh. "Me either." Outside, students were hurrying between classes, but inside that little cafe, everything felt slower. Laya reached into her bag and pulled out something small, wrapped in a pale yellow baby sock. She placed it gently on the table between us, like it might burn her fingers. "I found this last week," she said. "It's from our home security system. Jordan deletes a lot of stuff, but sometimes he forgets the backup logs." I didn't reach for it. She looked down. "I didn't know he sent those cookies. He told me he was handling things, said you were getting paranoid, that you were talking to lawyers." My voice came out softer than I expected. "I wasn't, not until after." She gave a slow nod, like hearing that only made it worse. "I know he's been different," she said. "Secretive, controlling, ever since he changed jobs 2 years ago. He won't let me ask questions, gets angry if I do." I looked at her mug, still full. She hadn't touched it. "I saw him once," she continued, "mixing powder into his tea. When I asked what it was, he snapped, said it was just vitamins." The waitress came back with my coffee. She also refilled Laya's tea without asking. We both mumbled thank you, and she walked away, unaware of everything hanging in the air between us. "You need to talk to the police," I said. Laya wrapped her hands around her mug, but still didn't take a sip. "I have a baby, Evelyn. If I testify, if this comes out, I could lose everything." I wanted to scream, but what I said instead was, "What about me?" Her eyes welled up, but no tears came. She gently slid the bundle across the table. "I don't know what's on it," she whispered, "but I hope it helps." The baby sock felt soft in my palm. I slipped it into my purse like it was something I wasn't supposed to have. We sat in silence again. The music overhead changed to something light and slow, maybe a Norah Jones cover. I took a sip of my coffee. It tasted flat. Then Laya said something so quietly I almost missed it. "He told me, he said you were planning to take him to court about the house. That's why he sent them." My stomach turned. I looked her in the eyes. "And were you going to let me eat them?" She didn't answer, didn't even blink. I stood up slowly. The room suddenly felt too bright. That baby sock in my purse felt like it weighed 10 pounds. I walked out into the wind, pulling my coat tighter around me, and I didn't look back. I didn't go home after the cafe. I drove straight to the station, my coffee still warm in the cup holder but untouched. The flash drive sat on the passenger seat, wrapped in that soft baby sock like it was trying to stay innocent. The line between suspicion and proof is thinner than the icing on a cookie. By the time I walked into the Eugene Police Department, the fluorescent lights had settled into that familiar evening hum. I told the officer at the front desk I had something for Detective Chen. 10 minutes later, I was in his office again. He looked up when I walked in and motioned for me to sit, but I didn't. I said, "I have this," as I unzipped my purse. When I placed the bundle on his desk, something shifted in his eyes. Maybe it was curiosity, maybe something else. He peeled back the baby sock and raised his eyebrows at the odd wrapping. "What am I looking at?" "A flash drive," I told him, "from their home security system. Laya gave it to me." Chen turned toward his computer, plugged it in, and opened a folder labeled Cam Front. He skipped through hours of footage, mostly still scenes of a quiet kitchen, nothing moving. Then, around 1:12 in the morning, something flickered on screen. It was Jordan, my son. He moved like he had a purpose. The lights were low, but the kitchen camera still caught everything in that grainy black and white. He placed a plain cookie box on the island. Then he reached for another container. This one had a sticker on it. I couldn't read it, but I recognized the shape. A prescription jar. He poured something from it into a bowl and stirred. Chen paused the footage. "You recognize that label?" "Prescription powder," I said. "One of his cleanse diets. He used to take it every morning for months. He was obsessed." "Is it dangerous?" he asked. "If it's taken the wrong way, absolutely." Chen leaned back in his chair and folded his arms. "We'll need to have it tested. Could take a few days, but you did the right thing bringing this in." I sat down slowly. The room suddenly felt colder. "What happens next?" I asked. "That depends on how fast the lab works," he said, clicking through a few more frames. "And how careful your son's been." On screen, Jordan was wearing gloves now. He sealed the box using a handheld heat gun. I remembered that heat gun. He showed it off last Christmas, said it was for his shipping business. Then he looked straight into the camera. Right into it. As if he knew it was there. As if he wanted to be seen. Chen froze the frame. He asked, "Do you have a lawyer?" without even looking at me. That question landed harder than I expected. "No," I said quietly, "not yet." He nodded, his face unreadable. Might be time to think about it. I didn't say anything. My hand was wrapped tight around the strap of my canvas tote. When I finally looked down, I saw red marks across my palm. I hadn't even realized I was holding it that hard. Across the room, behind a pane of glass, someone kept typing. The world outside just kept moving, like always. But inside that office, everything I'd built, my family, my trust, my silence, felt like it was falling apart, slow and quiet like wet wood. But I didn't cry. I just sat there, steady, waiting for the truth to finish downloading. I never thought I'd be the kind of mother who would hand over evidence against her own son, but here I am. If you've ever questioned someone you raised, someone you loved, I want to ask you this. How did you know when it was time to stop hoping and start protecting yourself? Leave me a comment if that line ever blurred for you. And if you're still here with me, thank you, because in the next chapter, I'll tell you what the footage showed. Some truths don't just sit quietly in a file. Some truths scream. The next time I saw Jordan, he wasn't in my living room holding a birthday box. He was sitting in an interrogation room, his wrists cuffed to a steel table. There's nothing colder than watching your own child pretend you don't exist, especially when you spent your whole life teaching him to look people in the eye. Detective Chen had called that morning. His voice was steady but clipped. He said, "It's time." I wore a soft gray blouse, the one I used to put on for book club. I don't know why, but it felt like a kind of armor. The heat outside stuck to me like guilt, but inside the station, everything was sterile. The lights hummed, the air felt like it didn't belong to anybody. I sat in the observation room behind a one-way mirror. My heart was lodged somewhere between my throat and my spine. Jordan sat perfectly still. His fingers tapped lightly on the edge of the table. When the door opened and Detective Chen walked in with a manila folder, Jordan didn't even blink. But when he saw my name printed on the tab, something in his jaw tightened. I watched his lips move. He said something, but I couldn't hear it through the glass. Then Chen turned to face the mirror. He paused, then asked if I wanted to step in. I said yes. The room was cold in that way that doesn't just touch your skin, it sinks into your bones. I sat across from Jordan. The silence stretched between us, thin and shaky like wet paper. "This isn't who you are," he said, his eyes locked on mine. I looked back and said, "No, but maybe it's who I need to be." Something flickered in his face. I couldn't tell if it was fear or disappointment. A few minutes later, Chen came back in. I stepped out while they talked. My hands were still shaking. He found me in the hallway and handed me a bottle of water. I didn't open it. He said quietly, "We confirmed the substance. Same traces were found in Nancy's system. We're still waiting on the full tox reports." I didn't ask what the charges would be. I didn't want to know. Not yet. Instead, I asked, "Do you think he meant to kill me?" Chen took a breath, chose his words like I used to choose where to shelve rare books. "I think he meant to scare you, and that was enough." We stood in silence for a moment. Then I turned back toward the window. They were leading Jordan out. His head was high, too proud to bow. But when he passed the doorway and saw me again, he didn't shout. He didn't beg. He just said, "You'll regret this." I didn't say anything, not then. But after the hallway emptied and the footsteps faded, I walked back in, sat down in the same chair I'd used earlier. My hands rested on the table, still trembling. Cuffed wrists, trembling hands, same bloodline. Different ends of power. And to the cold, sterile room, I whispered, "I already have." When I got home from the station, I didn't take off my shoes. I didn't turn on the lights. I went straight to my office and opened the flash drive Laya had given me, not because I wanted to see him again, but because I needed to. The lavender diffuser was humming in the corner, filling the room with a soft scent that mixed with dust and the dry smell of old paper. This used to be the space where I organized recipes and paid the water bill. Now it felt like the place where I sorted through truths. The desk lamp cast a small pool of light across the keyboard. I slid the drive in. The screen blinked once, then opened up to a row of video files, each stamped with a date from the past 4 months. I clicked play. The first few hours didn't show much. Jordan moving around the kitchen like he was on autopilot, making coffee, sorting mail, no humming, no whistling, just going through the motions. But after a while, things started to feel off. There were containers labeled in thick black marker. Some he put into a tote, others he pulled out. I watched him scribble notes on scraps of paper, then feed them into a shredder without a second glance. At one point, Laya walked into frame with the baby in her arms. Her eyes went from him to the floor. He said something to her. It looked sharp. It looked short. But the video had no sound, so all I could do was watch. Then Jordan held a pill bottle up to the lens, and he smiled. Not a playful smile, not a warm one, just a smile. I paused the video. The screen froze with his face right there, standing in my old kitchen, wearing that smile I used to know, except now I couldn't recognize it. I leaned back in my chair and stared. That's not my son anymore. The video ended. The screen went black. And there, reflected in the glass, was my own face. Lined, tired, heavier than I remembered. I reached up and touched my cheek. The skin didn't bounce back the way it used to. I ejected the drive and deleted the local copy. Then I opened a new document on my computer, a blank page, white, waiting. The title, Living Trust Revision. My fingers hovered over the keys. There were no lawyers, no officers, just me, a cup of cold tea, and a dull ache behind my eyes. Then I started to type. I, Evelyn Harper, being of sound mind. Not because I was giving up, but because it was time to reclaim what hadn't been taken from me. Not yet. They call it pre-trial prep. I called it a long goodbye. The morning I visited Richard's grave, the pine trees swayed gently, like old men whispering secrets. It had been 2 years since he passed. I hadn't been back since the funeral. But that morning, I brought cookies, store-bought, still sealed, tied with a simple ribbon. I placed the box at the base of his headstone and whispered, "You should have met him at his best." I sat down on the bench nearby, the one we used to share every 4th of July when the cemetery hosted those little brass band concerts. Back then, Jordan would run between the headstones like they were part of some playground, always laughing, always moving. Now, his name showed up under mine on legal forms. Only living relative, primary contact, victim's statement. I rubbed my thumb along the envelope in my hand. Inside was my draft, words I never thought I'd have to write. I am not your victim. I am your mother. But that doesn't mean I'll stay silent. Back at home, the air felt too still. The house creaked like it had something to get off its chest. I put the kettle on and let it scream for me. Then I picked up the printed statement and started again. This time, I read it out loud. Slowly, clearly. I only tripped over my words once. Halfway through, my voice cracked, not from sadness, from sheer exhaustion. But I kept reading. That was always the hardest part, keeping on when it would be easier to fall apart. The phone rang. It was Nancy. Her voice sounded stronger than last week. She said, "I don't remember everything, but I remember you being there." I told her she didn't need to remember. She was safe now. That's what mattered. Then she asked me if I was scared. I told her yes. And she said, "Good. That means you still have something left to lose." After we hung up, I folded the statement into thirds, slipped it into a yellow envelope, labeled it in blue ink, for court, June 24th. It didn't feel like armor. It felt like a funeral program, one for a version of myself I didn't need to carry anymore. I went into the kitchen, poured the tea, stood by the window, watched nothing happen. No wind, no birds. Just a quiet house that had finally stopped holding its breath. Then my phone buzzed. Unknown number. I hesitated, then answered. "Hello?" A woman's voice came through. Soft, uneven. "You don't know me," she said, "but I know your son. I know I'm not the only one who's ever had to choose peace over family. If you've ever sat there wondering whether protecting yourself made you the bad one, tell me in the comments. What would you do if someone you loved crossed a line you couldn't ignore? And stay with me, because the woman who just called, she's about to tell me something that changes everything. The phone call came just as the rain started, not heavy, just that soft tapping against the windows, the kind that makes a house feel less like shelter and more like memory. I lit a lavender candle on the desk and watched the flames settle into a quiet rhythm. Then I picked up the phone. "Mrs. Harper?" Her voice was cautious, worn around the edges. "You don't know me. My name is Renee." I didn't say anything at first. Sometimes silence feels safer than sympathy. She continued, "I met your son when he was 26. We worked together at a startup in Denver. He was magnetic. The kind of man who learned your favorite coffee order before you even told him. I let out a breath I hadn't realized I was holding. That sounded like Jordan. We got close. It wasn't romantic, just intense. He borrowed some money, just a few $100s, said it was for a car repair. I didn't think twice. Then he disappeared. There was a pause. Outside, the rain picked up. I found out later he'd opened a credit card in my name, maxed it out. It took me a year to fix everything. I almost lost my apartment. I swallowed. "Why are you calling now?" She said, "My friend sent me a link, a local article about your case. She asked if it was the same Jordan Harper. I looked you up. I didn't know if I should call, but I guess I needed to know if I was the only one." "You're not," I said. My voice cracked. I cleared it. Renee let out a long breath, like someone who'd been underwater too long. "He made me feel invisible," she said. "But you made him visible. Thank you." I didn't know what to say to that, so I just told her the truth. "You've helped more than you know." We stayed on the phone for another 10 minutes, not just about Jordan. We talked about regret, about how betrayal doesn't always scream. Sometimes it's quiet, polite, almost reasonable. And by the time we said goodbye, we both sounded a little steadier. After the call, I dragged her voicemail into a new folder on my computer. I named it Truth, Not Guilt. Then I called Detective Chen. He picked up on the second ring. "I just spoke to a woman named Renee," I said. "She worked with Jordan years ago. He stole from her, used her name." He was silent for a moment. Then he said, "We'll follow up. This helps more than you think." "Good," I said, "because I'm starting to realize he's been this way longer than I wanted to admit, maybe even longer than I knew him." After I hung up, I sat there in the dark. The candle flickered beside me. I looked over at the bookshelf. It was mostly empty now. Once it held children's books, then parenting guides, then true crime. Now it held just one thing, a manila folder with my court documents. I got up, walked across the room, opened my calendar. The red pen was right where I left it. I circled the date. June 24th, 4 days from now. The day my son would be called defendant, and I would be called to speak. June 24th came in quiet and hot. The sky was that pale, washed-out kind of blue that never really means rain, and the courthouse air conditioning hadn't kicked in yet when I walked through the doors. I'd barely sat down before my blouse started clinging to my back. I'd picked it carefully, cream with a navy trim, simple, clean, conservative. I wore my old strand of pearls, too. The last time I had them on was at Jordan's college graduation. Now I was wearing them to testify against him. The courtroom smelled faintly of old wood and something even older, like nerves that had settled into the walls. I sat near the front, hands resting over the manila envelope that held my victim statement. The judge came in without fanfare. Jordan was already seated at the defense table, wearing a dull gray shirt the county had issued. He looked smaller somehow. Or maybe, for the first time, I was seeing him without the lens of hope. When the prosecutor started speaking, I didn't catch much. I was watching Jordan's hands. His fingers were laced together, thumbs rubbing back and forth. He didn't look at me, not once. Then they called my name. The walk to the witness stand felt longer than it probably was. My knees didn't feel steady, but I made sure not to show it. I took the oath with a voice that stayed even. Then I opened the folder. "I gave you everything," I said, "and when I asked for nothing, you gave me fear." I spoke simply. I told them about the cookies, about Nancy, about the quiet unraveling that had gone on for years. I didn't speak with anger. I just told the truth. And I ended with this. "You were my son. You still are. But I can't protect that name with silence anymore." When I looked up, he wasn't looking at me. He was staring down at the table. There was no flicker of acknowledgement, no defiance, Just nothing. Somewhere behind me, I heard someone sniffle. I didn't turn around. I knew it was Laya, and I realized then she had brought the baby. I hadn't expected that. The judge thanked me. His tone was steady, neutral, but there was a weight in it. He said the evidence would take several more days to review, but what he'd seen so far pointed to, in his words, a disturbing pattern of premeditated psychological harm. Hearing that, I felt a strange mix of validation and emptiness. When I stepped down from the stand, the floor didn't shift. My legs still worked. I walked back to my seat, just like I'd practiced so many nights before, whispering every sentence in the dark until the words finally stopped shaking. Outside, Nancy was waiting for me on the courthouse steps. She didn't say much, just reached for my hand and held it. "You did what mothers do," she said softly. "You showed up." We sat there for a while, watching people spill out onto the sidewalk. Above us, a flag stirred gently in the wind. The heat wrapped around us, heavy like a second skin. Then a voice broke the moment. A deputy. "Excuse me, ma'am." We turned. Jordan was being escorted through a side door. His wrists were cuffed, his head was down. He passed right by. And for the first time, he looked up. But not at me. His eyes found the baby in Laya's arms. The little one was squirming and cooing under the shade of a wide sun hat. I don't know what Jordan felt in that moment. All I know is what I didn't feel. Not pity, not anger, just the end of something, and a breath I could finally take. I didn't bake for my birthday this year, but I did light a candle. It was early, too early for even the birds. The house held that kind of stillness that only comes with age, with grief, and with coffee left to steep a little longer than usual. Outside, the garden had come alive without asking. The tulips curled toward the morning light, and the sage I thought wouldn't survive the frost stood tall, stubborn, and blooming. I walked barefoot through the grass, the dew soaking between my toes. There was something sacred about feeling the earth like that, with nothing in between. Back inside, I opened the freezer. Wrapped in wax paper, tucked into an old plastic container, were the last 2 cookies. I took one out, set it gently on a small ceramic plate. The glaze was chipped at the edge, but I liked it that way. Imperfect, but still whole. I placed the plate on the table and lit the candle beside it. "I'm still here," I whispered. What filled me wasn't bitterness. It was breath, the kind I used to struggle to find, the kind that stays with you after the worst is over, when you're left with the remembering. My phone rang. It was Nancy. "Happy birthday, you stubborn thing," she said. "I'm picking you up at noon. Brunch. No arguing." "I'm not arguing," I said, smiling. "I'm obeying." We laughed, and just for a moment, I felt it in my body again, not just in memory. That laughter was still mine. After we hung up, I looked back at the plate. I didn't feel tempted. I felt done. I picked up the cookie, still untouched, still perfect in its deceit, and slid it back into the container. Then I walked it outside, past the garden, past the bees circling the lavender, and dropped it into the black trash bin. The lid closed with a quiet, certain thud. Back inside, I opened my journal, the one I'd started right after the trial ended. Its pages were messy, ink-smudged, sentences broken by tears, tea stains, and truths I didn't want to write but did anyway. On a fresh page, I wrote, "Forgiveness is not forgetting. It's just living anyway." I underlined it once. Then I closed the book, grabbed my purse, and walked out the front door. No locks clicked behind me. No shadows followed. Just sunlight, and a woman stepping into it. Out in the trash bin, the cookie began to soften under the afternoon warmth. Its edges wilted. A wasp hovered for a moment, then moved on. Some sweetness isn't meant to be touched, and some stories don't end with justice or revenge. They end with a door closing behind you and the world waiting outside. I didn't cry when that door shut. I just stood there for a moment, breathing. Because after everything, the hardest part wasn't losing my son. It was learning how to keep living with the pieces he took with him. Sometimes love means standing up instead of staying quiet. We don't always get the ending we prayed for, but we do get to choose what we carry forward. If there's one thing I've learned, it's this: silence doesn't protect you, but truth might. If this story reminded you of someone you love or someone you've had to let go, share your thoughts with me below. I would be honored to read them. And if you'd like to hear more, I'll be here, one story at a time. Next, I'll tell you what happened when my son said, "Oops, looks like we miscounted," and left me standing without a seat at my grandson's birthday. That chair may have been missing, but something far deeper. Let's talk about that.